Moving over to Newcastle, Pete, we spent a lot of time talking about Isak, obviously. I mean, Bruno Guimaraes has been the talk of transfer for two and a half years at this point. Manchester City, Arsenal always circling. But we know that Newcastle likely will have to sell somebody for PSR reasons and also in order to kind of bring any new players into the team. What do you think of maybe Anthony Gordon being that player that maybe makes way for Newcastle? Arsenal potentially now coming knocking, or some other clubs who are looking for a more out-and-out winger?
Yeah, I would be surprised if Newcastle would be willing to let Anthony Gordon go. As you said, there's always ongoing speculation at Newcastle due to the PSR FFP regulations. I think they'll price Alexander Isak out of a move. They'll demand too much for the Sweden international, so I don't think anybody will be able to get close to what Newcastle would want to sell him. So I expect him to stay, despite the large interest in his services. A lot will depend on if Newcastle qualify for the Champions League, which is looking pretty good right now, sitting in third place in the table, still got a game in hand, so the Champions League is within their grasp. I think if they can secure Champions League football, that will go a long way to keeping their best players. And for me, Anthony Gordon is one of their top players. Just before his injury, he was one of the first names on the team sheet. When he did get suspended for that Carabao Cup final, there was loads of people are really worried about Newcastle in that game because of that, but they showed they could cope without Gordon and they got the win. But Anthony Gordon, top player, England international now as well. He recently signed a new deal as well at Newcastle. I think it was in October, last October that he signed a new deal, so he's under a long-term contract. So if Newcastle were forced to sell him, it would be big money. So I'm not sure Arsenal would be willing to spend that type of money on Anthony Gordon either. So I think Newcastle would maybe look elsewhere if they were forced to sell players to try and toe the line with FFP and PSR. But for me, Anthony Gordon's still a key man in Eddie Howe's plans.
And Paul, Dominic Calvert-Lewin has kind of just been linked with Newcastle over the past year, but over the last few months, obviously not as much. It does look like he'll be leaving Everton this summer. Is this the kind of deal that they should be looking at Newcastle for? Free transfer, probably wouldn't be too high on wages considering his injury history and lack of form recently. As someone who can kind of come in and give Isak a game off here and there, they've always kind of needed an extra centre forward in that squad.
Yeah, injury history, lack of form, sign a striker that doesn't score goals. Can't really see why they do that, in all honesty. He's not really pulled up any trees in the last 2 or 3 seasons, Dominic Calvert-Lewin. The quality's there, no doubt, early on in his Everton career. He's been at Everton for a long time now. And as you say, it is going to look like Everton are going to allow him to move on. And there's a reason that Everton are going to allow him to move on. You can't have a backup striker, which is what it will be at Newcastle, who's not always fit and who needs a run of games to get any kind of form going. So it's going to be a difficult one for me. Dominic Calvert-Lewin needs to go somewhere where he's going to play every week. If he can keep himself fit, he needs to go somewhere and play every week. I know he's been linked heavily with Newcastle. I think it's because he's on a free. But listen, we talk about Newcastle and the FFP and PSR. They were clever in the last window. They let Elliot Anderson go. Yes, it was for a lot of money and they didn't really want to let him go, and you see how well he's done at Nottingham Forest. But actually, I said in the last window that if Newcastle come out of the window with the squad that they went into the window with, they've had a good window. And at the moment, you look at the squad that they've got, they're competing in the Premier League, they're third in the Premier League, they've got a trophy in the cabinet. Why does Eddie Howe need to go selling his best players? There'll be a way at Newcastle, if they do need to strengthen in certain areas, you cut off some low-hanging fruit in the dressing room. Yeah, the squad's big, there's a lot of players in that dressing room, but I don't think they need a massive overhaul at Newcastle. Again, it's frustrating that the richest club in the world can't go and invest like other clubs have done for however many years. To be a Newcastle fan, it must frustrate the life out of them, because it frustrates the life out of me. You see a club like Newcastle on an upward trajectory, winning a trophy, third in the Premier League, Champions League football, everyone looking forward to Champions League next season, and then what do we talk about? Selling Anthony Gordon, selling Isak. It's about sustainability. If that club isn't sustainable, I don't know what is. It's the richest club in the world and they should be allowed to spend. It's ridiculous. But what they did in the last window, the way that they cut their cloth, they sold players that Eddie Howe didn't necessarily need or want in his first 16, if you like. And I think they'll be clever in another window in doing that. And I don't think they need to bring in the likes of Dominic Calvert-Lewin when he's a centre forward who doesn't score goals and hasn't done for a long time.